Yeah, nice to see you again. Um, cool.
And
Do we
I
want to
think
give a few?
Maggie and Kira asked us to say hi.
Yeah. Do we want to wait a few more minutes for people to trickle in, or do you want to get started?
Belle, do you think a few more of the bank people were going to join?
We have few people on here already. I think we can get started if Christina's okay with it, and then kind of let people roll in.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right, sounds good. Cool. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Claire. I go by Kobu Claire on the Slack, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm a senior in high school. And I'm really, really excited to run this AMA because we had such a great conversation at Horizon, and I also care a lot about like equity in tech and various like thoughts on tech policy. And it's really nice to be able to like talk to someone who also cares about such things. So I'm really excited for the AMA.
Hi, I'm Eileen, a 15-year-old hack lover, high school freshman, and programmer from Texas. I'm very excited to be hosting this AMA with Christina, who I had the amazing opportunity to meet at Horizon, where I learned so much from her about tech ethics, being a woman in tech and arts. Thank you so much for being here, Christina. I also really wanted to say that I admire all the work that you've done in these fields in helping and encouraging people to learn to code, a superpower to create awesome projects and to show them what they're capable of doing. It's so cool that you focus on all of these awesome fields, and you're a great inspiration to many of us here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to introduce Christina to everyone else first, though you guys probably know a lot about her. So Christina is the director of software engineering at GitHub and is currently focusing on the development of GitHub sponsors and open source development. And obviously everyone on here is massive fans of GitHub. A lot of us actually do, I think, run on GitHub sponsors. I think a few people do, so that's really cool. She's also an amazing artist, works as part of an organization that teaches formerly incarcerated people software engineering and associated dev practices, and cares a lot about tech ethics. Also, they went to the School of Poetic Computation, which is so cool, oh my gosh, which is like an experimental school that combines art, tech, and some theory. And I also saw some of your art, and it's so, so interesting. I love the way you mix like hands-on makerspacey stuff with like traditional forms of art, so like resin art. It's so interesting. And then finally, a lot of us were able to talk to her at Horizon a few weeks ago. I'm having amazing conversations with them at the dinner.
Awesome. Okay. So before we begin, we have to introduce some rules. So please raise your hand on the Zoom when you have a question. When you're called on, make sure to introduce yourself, say your name and where you're from, and try to keep the questions short and direct. So yeah, let's get started. Okay. Yeah, I'll go with the first question. So, have you noticed any specific ways that your knowledge of coding has influenced the way you create art or the way you think about art?
I love that question. Diving right in, let's go into the deep end. Hi, everybody. I'm very, very excited to be here with you all. Thank you for the lovely introduction. You all flatter me too much, but I will take it. Yeah, so like you said, I have a background in art, not professional, but you know, an amateur art practice for most of my life. And I'm also in tech, and the intersection of those two things is something that I am very excited about. And sorry, Eileen, your question was, does my background in tech influence art or the other way?
Oh, yes. Like if you noticed any specific ways that your knowledge of like coding has influenced like the way that you create art and think about it.
Yeah, great question. I think yes. I mean, I think learning to code and being exposed to technology and like the underpinnings of our world, and whether it be web development or other things, like does influence your thinking. And I think it helps like kind of pull back the curtain of all of these systems that we're living in, whether we realize them or not. So yeah, I do think that it influences my art. Whether that is visually apparent in the art, I think is debatable. I do historically have a lot of things that are like very analog. So both resin and working with bleach, things like that. And during my studies at School for Poetic Computation, I did start some projects that I haven't launched that are more explicitly in the intersection of art and technology space. So as an example, there's this tool called WordNet, and it's essentially, it maps words that are synonymous with each other. And I was looking into like, how can we use this to take corpus from somewhere and change the meaning. So as I guess as a concrete example, this is a preview of a project that never launched, but I wanted to take, I'm an immigrant and I have a history of, I came to the US as a child and I'm originally from Bulgaria. And I wanted to look at like the immigration process for folks that maybe like don't have a smooth immigration process and are having trouble. So the corpus that I was using was like publicly available court cases for people's immigration. And it's like pretty common that folks get like denied for visas and things like that. So like, it's also wild that like this information is publicly available on the internet, but it is. So the idea was to kind of take this corpus of like denial of visas and then like take that denial and like replace like those aspects of the words and what was in it with something like more positive and like present that as kind of a reflection on like our immigration process and how broken it is and how we can turn around something that's like sometimes like very devastating for families into like a vision of hope that is like not launched by any means. And, I haven't worked on it on quite a bit, but that's like one concrete example where I think like we can take our technology skills and apply them in like a slightly different way. Like, what is the utility of that thing? It doesn't have utility from a technical perspective. It's more like an exercise, like a thought exercise, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, that I really admire like how like every single work like thing you do, it does do like a real like impact, and I love that.
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand. In the meantime, I'll just ask a quick question because you talked a lot about like mentorship, or sorry, you haven't talked a lot, but you do a lot of mentorship. And I guess like, what do you think is the best way to teach? Like, what are the best ways of education to encourage code education and to mentor, especially for people who are unfamiliar or don't believe in themselves in the same way, like maybe like people who see themselves represented a lot would?
Yeah, I love that question. I guess I'll start. Yeah, I'll work backwards. Maybe it is common that there is this conception that like coding is not everybody can do it, or it's really hard. It is for like a select few who go to university for CS and computer science and graduate. And while computer programming is not trivial, right? I wouldn't say that it's simple or easy. I don't think it's true that it is like the purview of a small elite group of folks. I don't have a computer science degree. I went to a coding boot camp. And while I was in that coding boot camp, I had this still from Bob Ross. Y'all are much younger, but I don't know if you know who Bob Ross is. He used to like teach painting to folks.
Of course.
And in that in that world, he had said, talent is a sustained practice. Anything that you practice, you can do. And I would look at that thing like literally every day. And I was like, okay, like that really resonates with me. And I think so many people in so many fields, you look at them and you're like, wow, you're incredibly talented. I could never do that. The answer is they spent tons and tons of time building that incredible talent through repetition. And if I or you or anybody else also spent that same amount of time through repetition, I or you would also be in that same position. So that's really motivating to me. And I try to like impart to folks like anyone can do this. You just have to kind of stick with it and be resilient. Like there's obviously a lot of challenges in learning computer programming, but you can do it. I think like that's the first step. As far as best ways to teach, I think it's important to be flexible as far as like people's different learning styles. So some people learn really well in verbal instruction and they like to sound things out loud to process things. Other people are not that way at all and they need to see things written down or a video, etc. So knowing like someone's propensity for learning, I think can be helpful, and try to adjust for that a little bit. And then I think there are some things that are the same regardless of people's preferences for learning, which is that I think with code specifically, we learn best by doing. So I like to encourage like, yeah, read some documentation or whatever, but like try to get hands-on as soon as you can. And whether it's a small little toy app or whatever, write the code, get the muscle memory of writing the code yourself firsthand. That goes a long way. And then the other piece is like, follow the thread like consistently and don't stray. A lot of coding is debugging, and a lot of debugging is tracing a thread. And when we're lost and confused, I think it's very common to be like, I don't know about this, but like, what about this other thing? And a lot of like, when I mentor folks, it's like, yeah, that is interesting, but how about like this thing that we didn't actually resolve? Let's go back a little bit and like really just literally step line by line, character by character, trace what's going on. That's really hard to do and overwhelming, but I think that's how we actually get to understanding.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how education could be done better. And I think that makes a lot of sense. How there's like maybe common threads and how people tend to like to learn. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Belle, go for it.
Hi, sorry. Hi, I'm Val, 18 from Malaysia, but currently living in Vermont. And I was wondering, like, I noticed you went to school for like a comms or information type role, and like what made you decide to like pivot into like coding, and like what was like the first time that you knew, like was it when you built a project or like
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. When I was in high school, what I wanted to be at that point was a designer. And, you know, I think digital design was part of it, but also like print design, it was a different time. So print design was still a thing. And I kind of did that a little bit, but, you know, also, like you said, a comms degree. As time went on, it became more apparent that like the world's technology is like upon us, you know, and this might be a repeat for some folks who were at the Hack Club NYC dinner, but I read this book called Program or Be Programmed by Douglas Rushkoff. And it's like a very thin book, and it's got, you know, kind of like 10, you know, premises in it. But, you know, the general idea is like code has an agenda, products have an agenda that is like imbued into those products by the people who write the software. And a lot of times like the agenda isn't even like intentional. No one is like attempting to like shoehorn their perspective into a product, but whether you try to or not, it still does happen. So you can be a participant in that world where everyone's agenda is what shapes your world, or you can be actively involved in shaping that world for yourself and for others. And that book really impacted me. And I was like, hey, like, I don't want to be on the sidelines of this. You know, I want to be a player. I want to like help decide what the future technical products of our world are. And I want to like help influence other people. So that was like one of the inflection points. Yeah.
That's very cool. And I guess just as a mini follow-up, and how do you think you're doing that today at GitHub? Like, what makes you think that like your role is kind of accomplishing that early dream you had?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, but fortunately, I do think that I am hopefully influencing. It would be a sad outcome if I was like, oh, actually, I don't. I think at a baseline, representation is super important, right? So when we talk about who can do code and who can't, like seeing someone who's different than the typical programmer, historical programmer, I think is important. And I try to like really, beyond just showing up, imbue like an inclusive culture wherever I'm at. Wherever I'm a hiring manager, I try to work towards a diverse culture. So and make sure I'm hiring folks from different backgrounds. That's kind of step one, like table stakes. And then also, you know, being at GitHub specifically, we do have a lot of influence in the industry in lots of different areas, whether that's open source or now AI. And I like to think that like the perspective that I bring is a worthwhile one, worth considering, and like am in the fortunate position to be able to have conversations with my peers about what is the best product to build for developers, and how might we go about that? So I know we all have opinions about AI, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. In the short term, I think that there's benefit in like having a seat at the table and being in that group. And I feel like that's like a more direct path to influence. So that's some of how I'm trying to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we go on to Audrey, do you think it's easier to create impact from an internal or an external method? Like you said that you like do hiring and you do things at the seat of the table. Do you think that's like more effective than doing it from the outside, like for example, activism or something like that?
I think both are important, and they work together. I guess I was kind of alluding to there, one other aspect could be like, if your company was doing something that you didn't necessarily agree with, right? You could like rage quit and be like, I'm not going to have any part of this. And certainly I think there are reasons where that is viable. The other approach is, well, I'm already here, so I can have conversations with my peers and help them gain a new perspective or maybe some context that they didn't have before that can hopefully help them change their minds. I tend to think that one's more effective in the long term than like a rage quit. Sometimes you think you're making splashes, but like people just forget about it. So I think working from internally to make a change is important, but then also that doesn't mean that like outside of that org, like people shouldn't still be activists and causing a stink, essentially. Like I do think a very important historical element of activism is people being annoying and not going away, right? If we didn't make a stink about the thing that wasn't right and we're just quiet, change wouldn't happen. So I think both of those are important.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Audrey, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Christina. I'm Audrey, and I'm from the Bay Area. I was one of the Horizoners that was lucky enough to meet you in person. And my question is, if you had an infinite amount of time, what is one project you would like to take on?
That's such a good question. Infinite amount of time. I would like to take an infinite amount of time to think about it, but I'll give you the answer that comes to mind right now. And is also maybe a little bit of an update since last time we chatted, which is that, so last time I was working at GitHub and I was overseeing sponsors and open source development. And then since then, as of this week, I'm actually overseeing a new area that is focused on lots of things, but one of the things is code search and the way that you navigate through code on GitHub to, for example, find references and essentially like, follow the path through your code tree to find a definition, et cetera. So in that context, like historically, my background is in Ruby on Rails web development, and code search is not powered by Ruby on Rails, nor is it has a web element component, but like the meat of the technology there is it's Rust, and it's also about like, memory allocation and semantic code organization is the best word I could use right now. And it's a very new area for me. So like what's really top of mind for me right now is like, I want to be an effective advocate for that team and the work that we're doing, more effective than I'm being right now. And some of that is like, I really want to onboard to that area. So if I had like infinite time, I would love to learn how to like contribute to the code base of code search, because I do think it's novel, and I think it has a lot of utility, and like a really important aspect of understanding code is like understanding context, and the more context that we can get, the quicker we can learn. I'm just like super excited about it, and I want to understand it very deeply. Practically, that's probably not going to happen, but I wish I had the time.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. Thank you so much.
Yvonne,
do you want to read Yvonne's? Yeah.
he asked, how did you get your first job in tech?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So how did I get my first job in tech? So this might be a slightly different answer than what you were asking. Before I was in software engineering, I was in product management. So I did spend some time in tech in that capacity, but not necessarily writing code. How did I get that job? I essentially like faked it till I made it when I was in college. I was in college and I was like, I want to work in design, so I'm going to make a portfolio. And a lot of the things in that portfolio were like fake projects, but I was like, here's what I can do. And I was able to get a job with that. And then when I was in design, I was in design for a long time. And then an opportunity came to transition into product, or, the product that I was design director for was shifting a little bit. And I was like, let me like help organize, launch this new version of this product. And I was able to kind of transition into product management. I don't think that's what you're asking. How I got into software engineering specifically is after being a product manager for a while, I was like, okay, well, I always kind of wanted to make the transition into engineering. So I went to a coding boot camp. I quit my job, went to Flatiron School. I spent 3 months there learning Ruby on Rails and React, et cetera. And that boot camp in particular has a like get a job or money back guarantee. And that was something that gave me confidence that, I'm spending a lot of money on this and I want it to be effective. And when I finished the program, they helped with job placement, et cetera. I did know kind of where I had wanted to land, which was Thoughtbot, which is where I ended up working for 5 years. And Thoughtbot had an apprenticeship opportunity. So that was kind of not an easier way, but it was a role that had more support than some other roles do. And I was able to join as an apprentice, and I had active mentors that worked with me to help me onboard. So if the question is coming from the perspective of like, how might one get their first job in tech when they're first starting out? I think looking for some sort of role that's like either an apprenticeship or whatever the title is, it doesn't matter, but just making sure that you have the support there to level up. Some jobs are like, we don't have time to teach you anything. You need to go. And that's difficult for anybody, but especially someone who is their first tech job. Does that answer your question?
Yvonne, does that answer your question?
Not to put you on the spot. Cool. Looks like it did. You're welcome.
All right, Val, do you want to go again?
Yes, I have another question. So, just now you mentioned that you're currently overseeing a team working on code search at GitHub, and you're not completely comfortable with like the code base. How do you navigate like leading like a product that maybe you don't know the ins and outs of, and like how do you like manage that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's been 5 days that I've been in this role. So I guess like long-term, if that continued to be the state of the world, it wouldn't work out. My title is director. So it isn't like a hands-on keys role. And a lot of how I try to bring impact to the team is like helping the team be better and helping the team be happy and successful and deliver, et cetera. So I'm a manager and I have managers under me. And a lot of what I do is like, how can those managers get the best out of those folks and make sure that everyone's happy, all the distractions are cleared out of the way so they can focus on whatever they want to focus on. At the same time, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't have any understanding of the code and what we're doing, right? A whole other aspect of that is like, it's my responsibility to advocate for this team, right? If someone was saying, hey, we need to like cut budget or whatever, I need to make the case, a compelling case about why what this team is doing is really important and shouldn't be cut, et cetera, stuff like that. So it's an uncomfortable inflection point that I'm in right now. What I'm trying to do is onboard as fast as possible. And I'm lucky to have like a lot of team documentation and videos and things like that. The goal is really to get to a point where I am technically understanding enough so that I can be an effective advocate. And I think, you know, even for someone who's like in a hands-on keys role, like it is frankly rare, I think, that you understand every part of the code base. I remember like pretty early on in my code journey, when I was an apprentice at Thoughtbot, I was talking with my mentor and I was saying, you know, we're onboarding to this code base. And I said, you know, I really like to see the big picture and understand things cascading down as opposed to kind of like a bottom up structure. I think I'm like a top down thinker and I like to see the big before I get into the detail. And he was saying like, I don't think you're going to get that. And I think that you need to like find a way to move forward without that understanding. And I was like, wow, like that blew my mind, but he's right? It's very rare that any one engineer has a complete overview of a system, and you just have to find a way to like get enough context to make the best decisions that you can at the time, have other people review your code who have maybe different context, and through like a collective understanding, try to get to something that's like relatively bug-free.
That makes sense. And it's super cool. And I thought it was really nice how you kept saying like you're advocating for your team. I don't know. I haven't heard many managers speak that way about their team. And I thought that was super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, that was like a really good question too, because sometimes you'll be part of a project and either you're busy or you're unable to understand like some of the deep technical parts. And I've like struggled a bit with that too. So that was a really great answer. Thank you very much. Lucas responds, hi, hey Christina, I'm Lucas from Sao Paulo, Brazil. What's the coolest thing you've learned recently? Not necessarily in tech. Thank you.
Such a good question. Y'all always have such good questions. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to get out of like the code search space if I can. But I can't. I'm sorry. It's the thing that's top of mind for me. I think the thing that I'm thinking about right now is how in certain programming languages, a lot is abstracted away from us. So with Ruby on Rails or JavaScript or Python or most programming languages of that level, we don't deal with like memory allocation, for example. You know, I think like C is a language where you would deal with memory allocation explicitly, but a lot of these other technologies abstracted away from you so you can focus on other things. Because they're not necessarily for memory allocation, they're for web development or front end UI, whatever it may be, React, stuff like that. And in the code search world that we're in, and at the scale of GitHub, it's really important to be able to serve query results really quickly at scale. And we're indexing like millions of repositories, right? Millions and millions and millions. So it's an interesting challenge to say, like, how can we do that in a way that's performant at the scale that we're operating at today? And we've built a technology that is, you know, new and unique to GitHub because our scale is different. And other technology did exist like that, but not necessarily for our scale. So in that context, how do we deal with memory allocation in programming is something that's like pretty new to me. And you're asking like, what did I learn? I don't know if there's no single answer, right? But you know, like one thing I'm learning about is like incremental compaction, and even just like the concept of compaction and how you store data and how you like store it even more efficiently than before. All that is very new to me. It's all like within the realm of Rust. So if you're interested in the Rust programming language, check that out. And it's kind of cool because it allows you to be super efficient with your code, and you can do things that other languages are not as performant can't do.
There's many Rustations on the Slack, so I think that would be really popular with some people. Cool. So if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to raise your hand. I guess like I have a question about, so you went to the school for poetic computation, and I'm curious, like, what do you think was unique in combining, for example, technology and art? I really love creating art with tech, and like I've done like, I don't know, various visualizations or whatever. And I guess it's just like, what were some cool things you've been able to do there?
Yeah, my time So I think the School for Poetic Computation is such an interesting school that's like pretty unique as well. You know, it's an independent school, so you're not going to get like a certificate or so any accreditation or whatever. And that allows them to be like pretty quirky and do very different things. The cohort that I was part of specifically was called Code Societies, and it was really looking at like societal impacts of code on our world. And different types of code, but we can talk about like literally programming or social codes we have with each other, and also took kind of like a historical lens to technology over time, and really like imbued me with a context about like what are some of the inequities that exist today in our technology systems, whether it comes to, you know, healthcare or like facial recognition or, you know, credit scores, securing a loan, all of these things. Like there are lots of tools out there today that are about like risk assessment of potential customers, right? Where you might pick up a customer in the insurance space or in the health space or whatever it may be. And they use a series of inputs to make like a risk assessment of how risky a potential customer is. And those inputs are based on like, same as before, like data sets that were imbued with a context that may not necessarily be a neutral context. So what is like the outcome of that, I think is an interesting question. And to understand like the source of it is also important. And to also understand that it's not like, oh, we just have like a bunch of like malevolent developers who are all really biased and want to like watch the world burn. Like, I think that's like a oversimplification of the problem. And when people think it's that, it's always like, oh, not me, not me. And I think it's just important to understand, like, even despite our best efforts, like systems get imbued with bias. I don't know if that's answering your question, but that was like the takeaway that I had from the session. And, you know, like everyone had a final project, and my final project was like a zine that I made, and I like hand wrote quotes from our time together, just because like the ideas I think affected me so much. And that was like the project that I wanted to do.
Eileen, do you want to call on the next person?
I had a question. So what has been the best advice that you've received during your apprenticeship at Thoughtbot that has like stuck with you in your career and that you still use to this day and use it with your team?
Yeah, that was another time that I think was very formative. I was really encouraged by people's both belief in me. It was a very senior group of folks who were willing to take the time to teach others. And the fact that they believed that I can do it, I think went a long way. If I had to boil it down to one thing, I do think there is a importance placed on making small iterative changes quickly. And I think like that is like really important to remember in every context, right? Like when it comes to even just like commits, like keep your commits atomic and, you know, make clean commits, tell a story with your commits is like something that I learned at Thoughtbot that I think like people don't care about anymore. They're like, oh, you're just going to like squash it at the end. And it's just like, why though? Like, you know, and no shame to, you know, people who are like, oops, or whatever. I love an atomic commit that just commits the code that works together, that you can extract on its own, that tells a story on its own. That's just one way that you can do it, but also like in the consulting space, Thoughtbot's a consultancy, so we embed with like lots of different companies, and those companies are paying a lot of money for us to be there, and they want to see a return on their investment. So in that context as well, finding like, what's the smallest thing that I can do to like deliver value quickly? We like to think, you know, like make a PR, make a pull request on day one, and it doesn't have to be anything groundbreaking. A lot of times it's like update to the onboarding documentation, but it shows like I'm here, I'm present, I've set up my dev environment, it's working, I'm able to make a commit, I've read the documentation, and here's a suggestion to improve it. So like just really quick feedback loop to get an early win in. I think that goes a long way towards like building trust. And like to this day, I try to do that all the time. I just told you all I'm starting a new role. It's important that I do it. I think it's like evergreen advice.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, the people who are hired for apprenticeship, like those people that hire them, I think they're amazing, like giving opportunities to them. And yeah, I just hope like this keeps going and like does like in this like coding world. Yeah. Next question, Lorelai, would you like to go?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lorelai. I'm 16. I live in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. It was really cool to meet you in New York at the dinner. My question was, you mentioned being an immigrant, and my mother is an immigrant, and I feel like that's impacted my perspective a lot. So I was wondering if and how you think being an immigrant has impacted your perspective, especially when working with tech.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. It's impacted my life in so many ways. I can't even count. I love I love America because there's so many different folks here. And I do think we live in, obviously a very multicultural country, mostly most areas. And I think that diversity like helps me have a well-rounded perspective, and I'm happy to like help provide that diversity in a lot of cases. I'm from Bulgaria, which is in Eastern Europe. It's not like a country people hear a ton about. So I'm happy to like tell people about Bulgaria. It helps center on the fact that like not everybody comes from the same place and has the same experience. I think sometimes some people forget and think like everyone has the same background as them or had like the privileges that they had growing up, etc. I think one way that this is like tangible in tech is like not everybody has the same internet capabilities. Not everybody has the same hardware capabilities, electricity, etc. So depending on like what we're building and what customers we're trying to serve, what does our user base look like, right? Like they might not have a smartphone, for example, or they might be on like an old computer, or their internet may be slow. The internet may be slow thing kind of resonates with me because we're in this time of like really slick UI and, I think all that stuff is getting better. Maybe like 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of slick UI and you remember like the page would move as you're scrolling down. I think we're past all that now, but all of that like front end pizzazz is like a really good experience for some people. And then for others who like may not have the bandwidth to like download your huge, I almost said GIF. I say GIF, I'm sorry, your huge GIFs.
No.
It can actually really degrade the experience. So just one example, like immigrants, depending on where you're from, you may have like very different technical capabilities, and it's important to be inclusive and make sure that like you're at a baseline, like your website is accessible by everybody, regardless of their technical capability or how they're differently abled, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think like there's a whole series of guidelines on the internet about accessibility guidelines. And yeah, I remember seeing a bunch of websites that would just load a million things in the background. And like there's this idea of like maximalist, like graphics on a website, which is really pretty, but is really hard to load for a lot of people. So that's actually a really good point. And I think there should be a lot more thought. And also like when you're in environments where people come from different backgrounds, they have different contexts. Yeah, well, yeah, I did some I think I actually talked to you about this. I did a presentation on this a while ago, and like did some guidelines on it. So that was actually really cool. So it's cool that you talked about it. Our next question comes from Peter. Go ahead.
Hello. I'm Peter. I'm actually in Singapore right now. So yeah.
Wow.
My question is about the recent like bursts of the amount of interest in like generative art. And I know that as an artist, you probably have seen a lot of these things. So I was just wondering how, like, what are some ethical considerations that you think are important for like both programmers, non-coders, and artists alike to be mindful when like using these tools, and just what's your general personal take on the broad topic and how it's evolving?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Peter. Good morning. I have a colleague in Singapore who is also coming online right about now, so I'm familiar with that time zone. Thank you for being up so early. Maybe it's not early for you, but it is for me. Yeah, great question. I think the biggest issue with like generative art, for example, is like if you were to, in the absence of generative art, hire an illustrator to do some work for you and pay them, I don't know, a couple $1,000s. And now, due to this technology, you're choosing not to pay that illustrator, and instead you're going to generate something for free or for whatever it may be. Like, that does actively take work away from somebody who is creating unique, original content. And the thing that you're getting instead is, you know, by definition, an amalgamation of existing content. So we can, I guess, potentially say that it's unique, but it's an artifact of an aggregation of our existing content. So there's some concern there about, certainly from artists, right? Like this, like, is this gonna, I think the hyperbolic version of this is like, is this gonna ruin our industry, or is art over? Like, I don't think that art is over. I think like generative art is like, in my opinion, no offense to anybody, still like pretty limited, and art is like a concept bigger than us all. So, you know, I don't think generative art is gonna replace artists, but tactically speaking, it could take work away from working artists who like have built their career on having a particular illustration style. So, you know, I have a background in design, and I remember back in the day, like you would look at an agency or whatever, and you would look at the artist portfolios, and you would try to find an illustrator that like matches the style of what you're looking for. Now you can, like, that stuff has been fed into generative tools, and you can choose, right? Like, I think we've all done it. I've done it. You get the selfie and like the 50 styles or whatever. Historically, that was 50 different people who have spent a lifetime to build the talent to have that style. So it is a little bit unfortunate. And I guess like I ask people to be mindful of that, right? Like, be aware of the choices that you're making and the consequences that they have. And ultimately, if you have that context and you still want to do that, like, I do believe in autonomy. So I don't think the solution is that we don't do these things or we don't have those tools. Like, isn't a better outcome? But I think like we should be thinking about what are the potential downsides of doing this, and how might I be not contributing to a better world, but how might I be actually causing harm? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I also think we should really think about how we're using this technology. If we look back, like, our whole history of us has been recorded through art, through cave walls and the Renaissance and everything else. So yeah.
Lorelai, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, as an artist, how important do you think it is to have like engineers and computer scientists be well versed in like humanities and other fields instead of just focused in computer science?
I think it is extremely important. One quote that I heard somewhat recently, I think it was from the CTO of Etsy, maybe. He had said, software development is a team sport, and that's really stuck with me. I do think, yeah, coding is part of it, but really like what makes software is the collaboration between people. And at its core, like, we're trying to solve problems, right? Like, we want the technology that we build to be solving an actual problem. And the process of identifying that problem and finding the best solution to it is like a deeply human process, you know? So being imbued with like the context of humanities helps you be a more well-rounded person and like function better in that world. And, you know, there are different archetypes of engineers. You know, maybe y'all have heard about like the 10x engineer, which, you know, I think people know it's like a myth now, hopefully. But there are certain folks where, yeah, like the stereotype is like, I'm like elite coder. And yeah, like some of that certainly is an archetype. That person is missing a lot of other skill sets that I think ultimately are really important in software engineering. I think the biggest one is communication. Like communication is like the number one thing that will make you successful. Like you can learn the tech, you can learn lots of things. If you can't communicate your ideas effectively and like build consensus with people, like you're going to be less successful, even if you're like a 10x coder. So yeah, I think humanities are extremely important.
Yes, I so agree, especially the humanities part. There's a lot of people who are like CS majors or whatever who like almost don't believe in studying humanities because they don't think it's like applicable at all. I've heard so many people that I'm really close to say similar things, and I'm always shocked. I'm like, but like it's obvious that you need to learn this or something, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, the only thing I need to learn is history because I don't want to repeat history. There's more to that. Anyways, I realized that we've asked you a bunch of questions. We're all self-absorbed, you know. Sorry. Do you have any questions for us? I think it would be really interesting if we turn the tables and you have any interesting things you would want to ask us hacklers.
I love it. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm super curious about like what y'all are excited about, right? So I know that we've talked about some things before and I don't want to, we can revisit them, I think, for a new audience, but what has got you all excited right now in this particular point, whether it's technology or like a cultural thing, like what's the thing that you're excited about next?
Feel free to just unmute and just go for it.
Yeah, everyone.
I think for me, it seems like people are trying to be like, I think people are trying to like slowly recognizing that like connecting with other people and being able to work with other people is like more important sometimes than the skill set you have, probably because of the onset of like tools that are now being powered by AI and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty cool because you see people like prioritizing like connections and like, you know, thinking like prioritizing like problem solving and like other skills that like previously might not have been like talked about as much. Like, yeah, I've seen like a lot of discourse like that on my Twitter feed and in Slack, and I think that's pretty cool. Like that shift from like what's important is not like what you can do, but like how you work with other people, because that's like gonna set you apart from like things that we have. Yeah.
I think that's also a theme go for it. No, go for it.
I think that what I'm most excited about is like more and more there's more accessibility for people who haven't been able to be in tech or be represented in tech. So like people from underserved communities are being able to contribute more into shaping technology. And I think that's really cool.
I think I appreciate I've seen a lot more discourse about like calling people out or calling companies out for not being very accessible. And also like a lot of people actually becoming more and more interested in like the people part of working in tech. I think this has been also really emphasized after the pandemic when people realized, yeah, like a lot of times just working from home and doing nothing is actually kind of depressing. And it's because you want to talk to people and it's fun to be around people. And that's something that I've appreciated a lot. I think another thing that I've been kind of interested in is just like designing practices from fundamentals. So like when you start designing a product or start designing a team, like how can you keep like certain practices, I guess, or certain ideals like in place, which is something that I've been trying to read a lot about, but I don't have specific thoughts on it.
And I guess just more currently, I'm very excited it's spring soon. I have not experienced winter before, and it is now not cold, and it's very nice that it's not cold.
Yeah, I love spring. Like honestly, like when all the flowers bloom, and also like before summer, starts getting very hot. So spring is kind of like perfect. It's like temperate and nice. And like, I guess I noticed it's like a little more breezy than summer.
I will say here, so it's been raining for probably like a week straight here. I'm in Jersey City, New Jersey, so just outside of Manhattan. And today it's not raining and someone is cutting the lawn outside and it smells so good all day. It smelled like spring and it just makes me really happy.
Yes, there are squirrels outside my window. I can like hear them in the trees every morning. And then there's like birds at my window. Like everyone's so happy.
Do you have any other questions? Sorry to put you on a spot like this. We should have told you this beforehand.
I asked like some version of this during the Hack Club dinner, and I wasn't able to get the answer because like we shifted to like intros or whatever. So I'll take the opportunity to ask it again. It doesn't have to be like a venue such as this, but you know, a venue like this or like the Hack Club dinner, like what are y'all like hoping to get from, you know, an interaction like this, or like what is like a thing that's like, I want to make sure that like I get this out of it, right? Like whether it's, yeah, I don't want to prime you, but like what's important for y'all to prioritize, like as we have conversations like this, or you have access to people, like what's like the thing that you want to optimize for the most?
I think for me, I have attended many AMAs throughout my time at Hack Club. Probably like 80% of them, which is crazy to me. And to be like, it's just genuinely like trying to hear people's perspectives. Like everyone we talk to has such a unique take on everything that you never expect and you can never understand from reading their LinkedIn or their website. Like it's just impossible. So like that's really cool to me. And I think secondly, it's kind of humanizing people in the sense like if I only know you by your title, I'm forever going to be like, oh, this is like someone I would never talk to. But then like jumping on this call and talking about spring with you, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, like I could like talk to people and get to know them. And it's okay that we're at different stages of our lives. And that's like personally meaningful for me.
Yeah, I think on top of that, there's also an element of like, I'm at a point in my life where I'm actually kind of unsure about what I care about and what I want to do, and be able to talk to people like you and people like who are like in wildly different things, like things that I've never thought I'd be interested in, and kind of figuring out like how they got there and what makes it so important to them. And even though I might not share that perspective with a lot of people, but I like, for example, in this anime, like a lot of things you do is something really close to me, and this wide range has helped me figure out like what is possible out there and like broaden the possibilities of different industries, different like paths in life. And I think that's really important to me because we normally don't spend a lot of time talking to those, like Belle said, in different stages of our life. So that's been really, really actually really helpful for me to figure out what I like and what I care about.
Yeah, for me, it has been that through going like to many AMAs, and especially workshops, it has like sparked me many like new interests in new like topics and fields. And also in tech is a really big industry, so you know you really need to think about like where you want to go. And through learning like by talking to people with awesome like projects they've done and what they've like gone through before in the tech industry, and like learning, I think it's just like you can learn so much. And yeah.
Yeah, love it. Cool. Thank you for answering that. I guess I want to ask that question because I want to make sure that I'm delivering on what you're hoping to get out of this. I guess like from my perspective, I'm always happy to, and I want to like sponsor you all. I think you are all like an amazing group of people who are so talented and have so much to offer the world. I want to like sponsor you and like create opportunities for you and like put you in front of different audiences. So like I want to make myself available, and I'll share my contact information as well. Like please email me, like let's stay in touch, find me on LinkedIn. I'm already bothering Claire and Eileen to like read my proposal for my conference talk. So like we can lean on each other and like help like further our careers together. Like I want to do that for you, and like you are also doing it for me. So let's keep that going.
Thank you. That's really amazing. Oh, that actually means a lot, I think. And this is actually, I don't think this has happened in AMA where like an AMA person really thinks about how they are, you know, like interacting with the people asking questions. So that's really meaningful. Yeah.
Could I ask
Go
a
ahead.
question? Maybe our infamous question?
Yes, I was gonna ask you to do this.
So. Okay, so hi Christina. We have every AMA we ask we call it the Zach question because in early AMAs our founder always asked the question at the end of every AMA. So I'm gonna set the scene. Imagine that when you joined this Zoom call, instead of coming to speak to us, you entered some sort of time machine and you stepped to 2500, the year 2500. And you suddenly find yourself dictator of the world. However, you're not only dictator of the world, there are, turns out, 3 worlds, all identical, and you're just a dictator of one of them. And you've been told that in 200 years from now, that, oh wait, sorry, not 2500 year, but you're in 2000 BC. Right, all the way back. You're going back in time. And you've been told that 2000 years from the time that you got transported back, 3 Earths will all collide and there will be a war. However, what can you do to maximize the chances of your Earth's success? And you only know everything that you know right now, and the technology is as it would have been like back then. So like nothing is going to change, and you have like the rest of your lifespan. So you don't have like infinite life or like any sort of thing. So what would you do for the rest of your life to maximize your Earth's chance of survival?
This is a hilarious question. Thank you for asking that. I wonder, so I honestly like my initial reaction is, I mean, obviously I would be biased for the Earth that I was overlord towards, right? But I do think that there's like an ethical question, which is like, why should it be my Earth as opposed to any other that is the one that gets to survive? So I do love the idea of like a cross-planetary consortium that works to look for another solution, right? Like, who's to say that it has to end up like this? We can figure it out together. If that's not an option, what would I do to assure the survival of my Earth specifically? I mean, isn't this like an interplanetary event? Like, are you asking me how I can change physics?
Not change physics, but like what would you do to like maximize your Earth's chances of survival? So in the sense like preparing them like to advance technologically or like scientifically, or like maybe you're like, we're all gonna do nothing and like all live in caves for the rest of our lives so that you'll never even know that war is happening. I don't know. Like it's really an open-ended question that depends on you.
I see. Okay,
Yeah,
Claire's
it's
saying
not a
not
collision,
okay, it's not a planetary event. Yeah, I mean, maybe like it's not surprising and maybe it's corny. Like my perspective is that we force interplanetary cooperation. I want to like challenge the foregone conclusion, right? So if one world, like I don't necessarily believe that my ideas upon the world are the thing that's going to be more successful than multiple overlords collaborating together to figure out how we can all avoid this. And yeah, maybe I think a lot of geopolitical like warfare is a lot about like avoidance. So like, what can we do with like nuclear codes and stuff? Like, what can we do to avoid this? And I think like that's probably the strategy that I would take with the other groups.
That's a really good response.
if I may ask, what has been the best part in mentoring people and learning to code? And what has been the best part of it?
Yeah, it's really rewarding, to share something that you're excited about with somebody else. And I always find that like I end up learning something. So it's kind of a trick, honestly. Like I'm the one who ends up learning a lot and getting a lot from it, maybe even potentially more than the mentee. So I do find it's like similarly to what y'all said, like it's an awesome chance to get a different perspective from someone. And it's an awesome opportunity to like learn how to be a better communicator yourself and get your ideas across more effectively to someone who's in a different place than you. And I find that like, it's like, mentoring with Emergent Works, it's made me like a more well-rounded person, a better teacher. Every time I talk to y'all, I get like so inspired to do things that, to be better and to be better in my field and all of that. So like, really, I win at the end of it. Hopefully we all win. That's the lesson I'm trying to imbue here today. And yeah, I mean, like the best part of like learning to code, it really is, again, I'm not trying to be corny, but I think like I've realized that vision of like wanting to have a seat at the table to help like determine like what is the best way to move technology forward. And I do feel like I have a seat at the table, and like that is a very influential position that I don't take lightly. It's very empowering. I think coding is very empowering.
Superpower.
Coding is a superpower. That's the tagline for Hack Club. All right, so I don't want to make you go over our time. It's already 8 p.m. So I know you probably have places and things to do. Thank you so much for doing an AMA with us. It means a lot. Technically, theoretically, every single time we do this thing called, okay, I don't really want to explain this, but we make an emote in the Slack where you do like a crazy face. We call it the pog face. And if Eileen, do you want to explain this?
Yeah.
If you do a pog face, we'll take a screenshot and make it an emote in our Slack.
And we use it like in our Slack. yes, it's like every like person we accept. Yeah.
Do it if you want. You can do a crazy facial expression.
Oh, do I get to pick whatever it is?
Yeah.
Or it's a specific face. Okay. Yeah. And then you're going to make it in a Slack emoji. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Oh gosh. How do I want to be memorialized? It should be like wild, right?
Awesome. Amazing. I took a screenshot. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah.
Sorry,
nice
go ahead, Claire.
Too. Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you so much. And thanks for sending us your information as well, if everyone wants to keep in contact.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, everybody, for the questions and for being here. So nice to meet you. Don't be a stranger. I do mean it. Reach out and let's stay in touch. And I hope to see you again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for coming too.